We're going to continue our study in Galatians. And if you have not finished translating, reading and translating Galatians chapter 2, I would urge you to do that. In fact, you must do it before you watch this video, because I am making these comments based on the fact that you have already done your homework. In fact, you will have to put on your homework or write on your homework that you did not finish it before you watch the video, in which case the video does not count, and you must go back and do your translation first. This discussion is intended to help explain some difficulties you may have had in your translation, and to go further and to show why it is important for us to study the Greek text as we learn to read and become comfortable with by reading out loud the Greek text. And there's probably no more important little writing in the New Testament than this epistle to the Galatians that explains the gospel in terms of an emergency that took place in the churches that Paul and Barnabas had founded on Paul's first missionary journey that's described for us in Acts chapter 13 and 14. Immediately after he returned home, he began to receive news of what was happening in those churches in what was called in the popular language reference as Galatia. It was not the official Roman province of Galatia, but it was popularly called that. And so the cities of Lystra, Derbe, and Iconium were all part of that area and were referred to as being part of Galatia. South Galatia, if you will, but it was simply called Galatia. And this little letter, written in those occurrences that happened so long ago, help us to understand what the gospel truly is and what it is that Paul gave his life for. Now let's look at the text. I'm going to share my screen with you. I've put down the Greek text and put next to it here in the right column, in the middle column, sorry, the Lexham English Bible, which I think is one of the best done by scholars, Greek scholars, more recent ones, using also the insights of linguistics that have come upon us in almost a kind of revolution. We began to understand many more clues in the Greek text than we did before, especially with conjunctions, which I must talk about before we finish this semester. On the right side column, I have put the ESV, the English Standard Version, which you may be more familiar with, and which gives us an alternative translation. First of all, it's important that we note that when we look at a Greek text like this and go down the page, down into the next page, that we look for clues that help us to establish paragraphs. Because those paragraphs will show us how the argument or how the discussion is developed, what their main points are, and what the main purpose is. And I need to understand that main purpose and those main points in order to bring those out when I proclaim, when I teach these New Testament books. It's not my thoughts about the gospel primarily, it's the gospel itself that is the power of God unto salvation. The message preached, but we must understand the message properly first. Actually, let me share another screen with you first. and it's this one, what Christianity is, what it is not, and why that makes a big difference. If I could describe the letter to the Galatians, the epistle to the Galatians, I would do it with this picture of a jeweler who is looking very exactly at a precious stone, in this case, a diamond ring, to determine whether the diamonds in it are genuine or whether they are just plastic. Is it truly precious, valuable? Does it have doxa? Does it have glory and value? Or is it a counterfeit? A banker will look at a banknote. He will look at a 5,000 rupee banknote and decide whether it is a true banknote issued by the government or whether it is just made from a copying machine. They can tell very quickly using clues that they know, looking very closely, whether it is genuine or not. And it makes a big difference if it is genuine, if it is the true gospel or a false gospel. In doing that, we've already looked at the timeline of Acts and Galatians and how they fit together. It's remarkable how God has designed his word, but he is a God who is a God of design. He designed our bodies. He's designed his word to fit together. And so Galatians and Acts fit together. Acts gives us the background in chapters 13 and 14. And then chapter 15 helps us to understand in concordance with Galatians, corresponding to Galatians, the urgency that was before Paul and Barnabas and later Silas in this task. If they didn't get this straight, then we would not be meeting together and learning today. I'm skipping over a lot of material here, these are all good things to do, but I would take time to do those. If we had more time, I will make note that this epistle of Galatians is full of contrasts: Paul and false apostles, true gospel and false gospel, law and promise, Jerusalem below and the Jerusalem above in chapter 4, slaves versus sons, bondage versus freedom, the fruit of the Spirit, the works of the flesh. Over and over again, we have contrasts. In this flow of the argument in chapters 1 to chapter 2, verse 10, in a sense, Paul is giving his CV. What are his credentials? What basis does he have for proclaiming what he says is the true gospel? And what about the other apostles? Are they in line with it? Do they agree with it? And indeed they do, he says. Now, as we look at a piece of Greek text like this, here we have verses 1 to 10. I would urge you to look for clues that show development in the text. One of the first ones is, of course, after 14 years, that not always, our chapter divisions are not always the best. They were made much later. The original Greek text did not have verse divisions and chapter divisions. But this one is at a good place after 14 years, epita, after. But notice in verse 7, a very strong contrast, ala tun antion. That's a combination of three Greek words together, small ones to make one large one, to go with Allah, but rather on the contrary. So we want to keep and notice that we're going to have we may possibly not have a new paragraph, but we might have some kind of page turn or something because of the strong contrast. We notice here that there's a reference to false apostles who have sneaked in kataskopesai to spy out. I always wondered what does this mean, kataskopeo, to spy out. I understand in order that they might enslave us. This is here a purpose clause with the subjunctive, doulo, a subjunctive form, doulosusin, that they might put us in a bondage, into slavery. So the gospel that these false apostles preach is going to, will put people under slavery. So I'm going to watch out for that. But why spy out? And I was encouraged to find a second meaning in a lexicon. It can mean not only spy out, but to lie in wait for. To lie in wait is what a robber does before the person comes along. He sneaks in, spies out, lies in wait in order to jump on and then to rob the person. So Paul is talking about people who are not only looking for trouble, looking to make trouble, but who are, as it were, lying in wait, just ready to jump on. And so we must look and be careful that there are people or there are ideas. There is a devil, according to Ephesians 6, verse 10. And he has methods, methodeia, strategies. And sometimes it's not people so much as his strategies that puts even thoughts in our heart, which are wrong, the wrong direction. They may be kind of good thoughts, they might be gospel thoughts, but they are not true to the gospel. And take away our freedom, eleutherion, here in verse 4. And here is this word, tun antion ta, and anti is a preposition in the place of, and the participle idontis, which is adverbial, and might mention when they saw or because they saw. It could be temporal, it could be causal. Because I saw that the gospel was entrusted to me for the Gentiles, they gave me the right hand of fellowship. I think probably it's causal. It could be also temporal, when they saw. And that gives me a chance to encourage you to, when you translate an adverbial participle, to decide what is the use of that participle. If it is substantival, the one who, then there's not much that you can do except the one who hates, the one who does, the one who hated, if it's aorist tense, and in the context there's past tense because there is no augment in the participle to decide if it's past tense in English, but the context will probably tell you it was in the past after I saw. That could be temporal, but this aorist participle here, idontis, is adverbial. And I need to decide what kind of adverbial use that it is. And I'm suggesting it's causal because they saw that I was entrusted with the gospel to uncircumcision. And they, to the circumcision, they gave me the right hand of fellowship. And because they saw God was working in me as he worked in them. Because they saw that my gospel was true, that I was preaching the truth, and they, the same as they were. They gave me the right hand of fellowship. So let's go further and look down. We can't look at all the details of our text. There, by the way, is another participle, own, here in verse 3 of chapter 2. It's ami. It's a very short participle form. It is nominative, masculine, singular, but it is adverbial. What use of the participle is this? And I would suggest that it is concessive. In other words, although he was a Gentile, Helen own. Titus, who was with me, notice the strong me, emoi, and not just moi. Gentile being, that's not a good translation. Although he was a Gentile, adverbial concessive, he was not compelled to be circumcised. Theta eta, aorist passive, the action happens to the subject, which happens to be Titus, Paul's friend and fellow laborer, helper. Notice the aorist passive forms and the action happening to the subject. He was not compelled, not compelled, but not even Titus was compelled to be peritim theme nigh. Nigh goes with here. It's the part of the, of course, the aorist passive infinitive, to be circumcised. This one I've already mentioned. Here we have actually meno being used in a more emphatic way by adding the preposition and using the verb diameno in the aorist tense, which changes the stem. You remember that liquid verbs that end in mu or nu or ro or lambda, liquid verbs do not take sigma. So instead the stem changes. Instead of meno, we have main. Oh, dia meno. Dia mean a aorist subjunctive, that the truth of the gospel, in order that purpose clause with the subjunctive ending might remain with you. Not just the gospel, but the reality, the truth of the gospel might remain with you. Remain continually. Another factor, again, to note is that de introduces a new development. In this case, a highly significant one. The Jerusalem apostles' response to Paul and Barnabas' gospel and mission contrast sharply with that of the false brothers, who apparently wanted to add something. And what they wanted to add is that the Gentile converts should be circumcised. And Paul says, if you do that, you're adding something not only cultural, that they have to be Jewish culturally, but you are adding something to the gospel that's not just national, but it is actually making it ineffective. It is like an impurity added to salt, which robs it of its saltiness, which is what Jesus meant when he said, what happens when the salt becomes unsalty is not good for nothing but to cast it out. So we have to watch out that the gospel does not get combined. You must believe in Christ and you must be circumcised. You must believe in Christ and you must be have a certain political view. You must believe in Christ and you must do this. The Spirit will show us after we come to faith, but faith alone in the word of Christ is what brings us to salvation. And Paul brings that out in this letter. Now I'm going to go back to our text again. But I think I will stop this video at this point so that we don't have too long of videos. But the first thing that I would encourage you to do as you read through the Greek text is to notice words that are developing words, little words like de, which announce to us that there is a change, that there is an addition, sometimes that there is addition of a new character, person in the or a new theme, or simply a slightly new development in that theme. De is not the same as kai. Kai means and. De is sometimes translated and, but de means more than and. It develops. It tells us something. There's something more we need to understand. It's not just joining two sentences together with kai, but it is announcing something further. And there are other clues that we see in the text that tell us that we something further that we need to understand. And notice again how often we run up against grammatical forms that we have learned. We've already seen two hinnas with purpose clauses in the subjunctive. So learning the subjunctive mood was not for no purpose. Without the subjunctive and the uses of the subjunctive, we won't be able to translate properly into English. And if we don't understand the right purpose, is it purpose or result, for example, they can be very different and have very different meanings. If we don't get them right, we won't understand what God is saying to us. So look for important words. Look for translation of participles. Look for uses of the infinitive. What kind of participle is it? What kind of infinitive is it? How is the infinitive used? Is it simply completing a verb? I want, fellow, to, go, to, see, or is it some other use of the infinitive? To live is Christ. To die is gain. It's being used as the subject. The infinitive, what usage is it of the infinitive? Or what usage is it of the participle? All of these things, grammatical things that we are learning, are very important for understanding.